So I told you a little bit yesterday about some of the things, the thoughts that would go through my mind before the shofar service when I was a child. That what we used to focus on mostly was whether or not the one who was blowing the shofar would even make it through the first round before needing a relief pitcher. I think as a kid, watching sports, there was always, when the manager came to the mound, and so there usually would be a long row of potential people to fill in if our shofar blower would you need to come off and kind of see the rabbi walking over to the mound going, I think I need a southpaw to finish up these shofar blowings. Thank God, I said yesterday, we have two very capable and able shofar blowers in Jeffrey Kahn and in Jonathan Goldstick. We'd explored together yesterday the meaning, potentially one of the meanings of this remarkable score that accompanies the shofar blowing. This long shofar blast called the tekiyah, followed by the broken, sobbing quality of a shivarim, and then the anacha, the weeping of the tru'ah. And what we explored together yesterday was bizot, that this remarkable fragment of a verse in Psalm 27, verse 3, this fragment which has been and will be our anthem throughout these high holidays. Bizot ani boteach, with this. We explored what this means. What does this mean? With this. On the first night of Rosh HaShana, we discussed this as the entire movement of tshuva, the entire possibility of change, which of course is the undercurrent of why we're here. We wouldn't be here if we didn't believe on some level that change was possible. Even as we return over and over again to the same place, the same melodies, the same stories, we believe that stories can change. We even explored the radical notion that might be the greatest contribution of Jewish history and Jewish wisdom to the world is that a story has interpretation, has narrative arc that also allows for a reinterpretation, a reframing of a narrative. And yesterday, in the Bezot sermon, it was all about what my friend Liora said, leave room for a new story. Leave room that the one before you, the Zot that is right before you, could change the rest of your life. Or that potentially you are the Bezot for someone else. You are the one that will change a narrative arc that they have held for a year, 2, 3, 10, 20 years. You never know. So this morning, before we enter into the shofar, I'd like to explore another understanding of where the shofar comes from, what it represents in our tradition. One of at least 10, 20, 30 of those listed. And also offer another way that we might enter into the next moments of the shofar with something slightly different. In this beautiful haftarah that Rabbi Rivera just chanted for us, the prophet Jeremiah says, Hashivenu Gad v'nashuva. Bring us back that we might be brought back. The word, of course, in there is tshuva, right? To return. But the great Hasidic Rebbe, the great-great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, Rav Nachman of Breslov, says this. He says, when we think of the word tshuva, one way to think about it, of course, is that we arrive at the high holidays with the very typical, traditional way of understanding tshuva, which means I've made so many mistakes, I want to be brought back. I hope I can make amends. I hope I can be in a place where tshuva is the kind of accounting that we make with one another and within ourselves, which is, of course, a fundamental assertion. We are, of course, accountable. We are, of course, responsible to some degree for our actions. And certainly, tshuva in that context refers to very specific things, a list of things. But Rav Nachman says, no, there's another way to read the word tshuva, return, and he connects it to something that many of us in this room might really appreciate. I hope you do. I appreciate it. He says tshuva is from the word yishuv, to settle. Yishuv, settling down. And he connects it to the rabbinic idea of yishuv hadat, when the mind settles. Yishuv Hadat, settling mind, or mind that is at rest. Yishuv Hadat. In Rav Nachman's words, he says, the sole reason that people are distant from God is that they lack Yishuv Hadat. They have an inability to settle their mind. Settling the mind. Settling the mind is not an easy thing. Settling the mind is maybe, that's the greatest understatement of all time. The mind is a wild place, isn't it? A mind that can take us to galaxies beyond, can have us in moments of rapture, in moments of absolute bliss, thinking about, I wonder if I left the lights on. The mind that is capable of innovation and creativity, the mind which is the most furtive of all human capacities. Imagining a future, imagining multiple futures is so hard to keep in the present moment. Yishuv Hadat, says Rav Nachman, is that when we are even in a sanctuary, the kind of sanctuary that all of us dreamed of being in for almost 18 months, we still forget to turn off our phones. The mind. The ability to stay focused in the present moment. The ability to stay present with what is and not push it away. The capacity that we have to make not room for another story, but for many stories all at once. The mind that can hold that, can look at it, can see it. The mind that can pause between one feeling and another. The mind that can make space between one action and its reaction. The mind that doesn't flinch when pain, unimaginable pain arises, but breathes and says, yes, this too. That kind of mind. But instead, of course, understandably, we have a difficult time resting there. We skip along the surface because sometimes, and understandably sometimes, to stop for a moment, to be present for a moment, means that all of those things that we run from might catch up to us. To stop can feel like death. Dormancy, the natural state of the world when it is hibernating, when it is refueling, when it is regenerating, that state of stasis can feel as if, I don't know, like a sentence, something that we are subjected to. The ability to settle the mind comes also with its concomitant, but not exactly the same quality, which is the ability to be bored. Oh, to be bored. What would it look like to be bored again? Bored again. To rest in not the Shabbat that comes at the end of the week, but the Shabbat between meetings and the Shabbat between thoughts and the Shabbat between. We have an infinite number of things to fill us, but not enough to empty us. In the in-betweens, there's always 1 million things to watch on YouTube and 1 million things to do on Facebook. There's no shortage now of things to read, things to see, courses to take, languages to learn, skills to attain. And if we were to ask ourselves over the last 18 months, which for many of us, but not all of us, of course, brought with it its share of boredom and settling, have we attained Yishuv Hadat? Maybe. Maybe for some of us, this quote-unquote forced respite has actually forced us to stop and look and settle and appreciate and notice. I hope it has. But Rav Nachman of Breslev says that tshuva means not only repenting, not only repairing, but noticing the quality of your da'at, of your mind. The great Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes, "The mind is very wild. The human experience is full of unpredictability and paradox, joys and sorrows, successes and failures. We can't escape any of these experiences in the vast terrain of our existence. It's part of what makes life grand. It's also why our minds take us on such a crazy ride. We can train ourselves," she says, "to have more yeshuva dat, more ability to hold that crazy tension. And perhaps maybe that's one way that we might imagine what we're rising in a moment to do, taking me back to the mystery of that shofar and its score. You see, the shofar in the tradition of many of the commentators reminds us of this morning's Torah reading, where there was a crisis averted, and instead of Isaac on the altar, instead a ram was found. That ram that was caught in the thicket, that ram that was caught in the bramble, that ram was caught and stuck. And that shofar comes to remind us to look, as it were, to look at the things that get us stuck, the places that we go, the places that the mind becomes crazy, like that thicket itself. And from that thicket to come and find a sound, a clarity, a something that can hold all of the other pieces. And maybe that's why the score begins with a pure tekiah. Do you remember yesterday we talked about the tekiah that returns, that second chance? Like in the middle of everything being crazy and everything is broken, everything is shvarim, it's shu'ah, and we say, bizod, this one might be the tekiah that brings me back my trust and faith in the world. That the tekiah that's on the way. The tekiah that if I open myself to it, it might be there. And maybe today it's a different tekiah that we might hear, the tekiah of a mind settled. A mind settled at the beginning and at the end that can hold like bookends the brokenness in the middle. That with that capacity, that clarity, that ability to extract from a place of thicket, of craziness, of dispersive thought and discursive thinking, we might be able to find something that will hold us in times where things that usually hold us fall apart. Of course, that's the name of her book, Pamashodron's When Things Fall Apart. That's the name of our service. This Tkiyat Shofar, the call to clarity, the call to settle, the call to return again and again and again, not to the objects of our mind, but the mind that holds those things. There is a Cherokee folktale that I love, where an old Cherokee tells his grandson, "My son, there's a battle." It's okay. Don't worry. Again. There's a battle, he says to his grandson, between two wolves that are inside of you. He said one is an unskillful wolf. He calls it an evil wolf. I don't know that wolves are evil. Called the evil wolf. Anger, jealousy, greed, resentment, inferiority, lies, ego, distraction, discursive thoughts, all of the places that we go. And the other wolf, he said, is a good wolf. Joy, peace, love, hope, humility, kindness, empathy, truth, connection. So the boy thought about it for a second and asked his grandfather, "Grandfather, which wolf wins the battle?" And what did his grandfather say? "The one you feed." the one you feed. Tekiah, clarity, settled, holding. Shivarim Torah, crazy, crazy, crazy mind all over. Feed the wolf that brings you back. Tekiah. You can always hear the wolf sound in the tekiah, right? Oh. Which one do you feed? We feed the tekiah when we settle and do tshuva. When we notice this beautiful room around us. When we notice life is beautiful, as Rabbi Kolaressa said, even in the midst of it all, there is clarity there. Oh, pull, shivarim Torah, life, of course. It breaks us. It breaks all of us. Settle the mind. Get clear. Bezot ani boteach. In that capacity that each and every one of you, us, all of us, in the midst of unimaginable things, hafachta mispedi lemacholi, you have transformed the brokenness and the mourning and the pain into the circle dance of the tekiah that begins and ends every moment. And I dance with that I trust. Feed that. See that grow. Sing that song. Hear that march. And tell that story.